Today, we're joined by Karin Brünnemann, and it's an absolute pleasure to have Karin here today. Karin has degrees in psychology and business information systems, and she's also studied intercultural business communications and is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in management. Karin is a consultant and project manager at several space companies and research organizations with a special interest in psychology and intercultural issues in future Mars exploration. She is also a flight planner for the Austrian Space Forum's AMAD 20 analog Mars mission. Karin herself has lived in 9 countries and worked in 26 and has been calling Slovakia her home since 2008. So today we are going to focus our conversation on intercultural competencies related to space missions and space crews. So Karin, thank you so much for talking with us today. If maybe you'd like to start with just giving us a little bit more information about your work and your research.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Jazz, for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure as usual. Yes, so my research is a bit at the overlap of space psychology and space culture, I want to call it, but it's not the right word, I feel. So the cultural aspects of space exploration, for lack of a better word, because yeah, I have interest in both these topics and some others as well, and I find it very fascinating. With all the analog missions moving ahead now, and with a second space station now in orbit, and more concrete plans to settle on Moon and Mars, we need a lot more research actually into psychological aspects of space travel, especially long-term space travel for professional astronauts, but I would say also for short-term space travel for tourists, because they don't have this previous very difficult selection process. They don't have years and years of training in other areas. So even if they go up to space for a few hours, there is always a risk that they might panic or something else, but they might not feel well or something like that. And we must make sure that they are safe and their colleagues are safe. Yeah. So I am a member of a joint Slovak-Israeli work group. It's connected to a university in Tel Aviv in the Eco Encounter Study Institute, and we have, for example, one experiment. It's called MSG, Movement, Space and Group Health, where we analyze mainly now in the AMAD 20 mission that is coming up in October in Israel in the Negev desert with 6 analog astronauts for a full month, where we analyze how the astronauts move. They are going to wear sensors, so we can track them in the habitat. Yeah, we can track if they stand closely together or if one of them just stays by themselves or something like that. And at the same time, we have some visual questionnaires that they fill in a couple of times a day. And just quickly for a few seconds, yeah, I'm feeling fine, I'm feeling isolated, I'm feeling stressed, whatever. So we can actually connect the movement in the space of the habitat, not in outer space, but in the space of the habitat, with the well-being of the entire group, not only the individuals, because it's a study about group sociology, group psychology. We have recently done a test run in the Czech Republic with Hydronaut, which is an underwater habitat, and we had 3 analog astronauts underwater for 2 days in a habitat that was actually made for 2 people. So they had some spatial confinements, and 2 days doesn't seem long, but if you're underwater, it's quite some time, and if you're really in a very, very confined space, so they could not really move a lot, and no privacy, nothing there.
That sounds a very difficult, challenging situation indeed.
Yes, and we had some good data back from that already. And we'll most likely combine that with the findings from the Austrian Space Forum mission as well.
What is the are you testing out a specific hypothesis that's to do with like movement or close proximity and the psychological effects of that?
Yeah, we're currently doing a qualitative study. So we don't have a hypothesis, we have a research question.
Okay.
Open-ended research question, so we don't have a pre-formulated hypothesis that we're going to test if it's right or wrong, but we have open-ended questions. Yeah, how do people behave in certain situations, and we're really looking forward to getting the answers there.
So that you can maybe formulate the next hypothesis.
Yes, of course. Once we have gathered some more qualitative data, we will definitely follow up with some quantitative studies to really verify and measure the extent of their feelings, their well-being, etc. Yeah.
So I did want to touch more on the cultural side of your research as well, because that, as well as obviously the stuff that you've just been describing, very interesting. I had just a very basic, like fundamental question is, how do you define culture? Like, what is culture? How do cultures develop and evolve, in your opinion and your, well, obviously learned experience?
Yeah, of course. Well, we define culture as the way people think, act, and feel. Yeah, what kind of emotions they have, how they express them, if they express them, all the repertoire of behavior. But there are also cultural differences in our ways of thinking. And it's thank you for asking that question right away, because often culture is equal with nationality. But there is so much more to culture, and nationality is a very recent construct. And humanity had culture well before we had passports. So it's actually, there are some national cultural traits, but we would not get the richness of cultures if we would focus just on the national aspects. There is, for example, the educational aspects. What kind of spirituality do we have? Do we live in big cities or in the countryside? Are we parents or are we not? Are we not parents? Yeah. Are we digital natives or digital immigrants? All these things play a role when we form our culture. Culture is nothing static. It has a core. You can imagine it like a sand dune. Yeah, it has a stable core, but the wind is constantly blowing it little by little by little further, and that's actually quite interesting. So there are some anthropological aspects to consider. It's quite a complex construct. And more often than not, professional culture or organizational culture is totally outweighing national culture. Yeah. So if I'm in a very progressive organization, or a small startup like Borospace has a different organizational culture than NASA or ESA as a big very big institutions. So this is often overlaying the national aspects of cultures, and we have professional cultures. Yeah, astronauts have a professional culture. We have our own language. You don't say yes and no. We say affirmative or negative. Yeah, so that's also part of the astronaut or mission control culture, the professional culture, not the national culture. So there are so many aspects to the concept of culture that it's can't be really explained in a sentence.
Absolutely, you can understand it's a very, very complicated answer to what might seem like a very simple question. One of the things you just touched on there sparked a little question in my mind was about, like you say, NASA has its own culture. So say, for example, on the ISS, do you think that NASA is the biggest influencing culture there, or do you think it's dependent on the individuals that make up each crew and the culture maybe changes because of that each time?
Yeah. So we have to be clear that there is no hard dividing line between culture as a group phenomenon and individual personality. There is a gray zone, there is some overlapping. So of course, every new crew will bring some new aspects of culture to the ISS. I have, unfortunately, not yet been able to go there to see for myself. I'm waiting for an invitation.
With you.
But we see some differences. There is, of course, like a common ISS culture. Yeah, you do things in a certain way. Some is because you have to, because there is no other way of doing it. But we also see that, especially when groups that had been groups before they came to the ISS, yeah, that have, for example, three of the 6 astronauts on the ISS, they have already been training together for several years. They might bring a subculture to the ISS, yeah, that is not shared with the other members, and that can be a big advantage. Because when we think about cultural differences, we often think about misunderstandings, about conflicts, about, yeah, we don't know what they want. But we also need to see cultural differences as a resource. Because if I have 6 people from 6 different cultures on the ISS, everybody has a different way of thinking, a different way of analyzing a problem, a different way of decision making. If I try one way and it doesn't work, then I still have 5 other ways left to do it. And isn't that a great thing to have? It brings so much more security, stability into such operations. And often we see that by combining people from very different cultures with very different approaches, we see them creating synergies and creating something that is greater than a single culture. And I think this is very important for when we really want to go to Mars, because our main restriction will be resources. So we need to leverage that resource of cultural diversity and need to be sure to steer it into the correct direction, that is away from destructive conflict, constructive conflict. We should actually allow and even encourage, but destructive conflict and of course misunderstandings towards something positive, towards creating a better solution, towards having a bigger having the eggs in more baskets than one. So if one thing doesn't work, we just go to the next one and to the next one, and until we find something that will fit. And what we also need to consider in this way is that cultural differences are often seen as, yeah, we have communication issues, yeah, we have misunderstandings. The STEM subjects are highly cultural because they have, I mean, 2 + 2 is always 4 in each culture. However, $2 plus €2 is not 4. Yeah, and we've seen cultural disasters, I can say, in spaceflight. In the 1990s, the Mars Climate Orbiter crashed, lost, I think, more than $100 million and years of science, because one organization, I think, NASA was operating in the metric system, and one supplier was operating with the imperial system, and they just sent data through the computer, and the data did not get interpreted in the cultural context. And the Mars Climate Orbiter crashed into Mars because one was using Newton as a force, and the other one was using pound force. And on the positive side, NASA saved a couple of $1,000 for not hiring a cultural consultant.
That's perhaps not the best cost saving there.
Yeah, and even STEM subjects, they're always embedded into a cultural context, and we forget that. I have done some intercultural training for a large satellite operator and builder about cultural aspects of risk management in spaceflight, and they were shocked. We never thought that culture has so much influence on what we're doing. And I think we need to increase the realization and the visibility of the fact that culture is also present in STEM.
That's really interesting, actually. Yeah, doing almost like a risk assessment of how, but in a cultural, like how culture could potentially cause these risks is really, really interesting, and a very difficult challenge, I imagine, as well, because it's not something that you can quantify easily.
No, but I mean, if it was easy, then we wouldn't be here.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, because obviously, so, you know, the big question is why should we be concerned about intercultural awareness and competence? And you've already touched a great deal on that.
Another example was the Challenger disaster. That was actually cultural differences between 2 professional cultures. Yeah, the O-rings, the frozen O-rings, the engineers, their culture is pretty much straightforward. There is a number of temperature. We haven't tested it. We don't go. Yeah, the management culture. Oh, we have to consider what our customer wants. We have to consider that we already have, I don't know how many times they had postponed the launch. And so they have a totally different way of thinking. They don't think in probably ultimately they also think in numbers, but in numbers on the bank account. But that's a big example for how a cultural difference in professional cultures, even in the same organization, can go wrong. And what you said, we need to make risk assessment, because at this launch day of Columbia, the people did not have a process for this cultural difference, how to solve it. They had not thought it through before. If we have different opinions, whom are we listening to? Who makes the final decision? It was just on the spot and very much ad hoc, and without too much risk analysis, not about the actual technical specification, but risk analysis about the risk management process. So it is very important. And if we go to Mars, we can't just go there and if something goes wrong and put it right. It's too
Yeah.
far away.
Yes, absolutely. So as always, like being prepared for such things is super important. And what do you think we can do as individuals to, I guess, increase our awareness of these sort of challenges and issues when it comes to intercultural kind of communication and the other barriers that you were talking about, perhaps in an analog astronaut context or even in a professional context outside of that?
Yeah, so I was thrown into this because, as you said before, I have been so far living in 9 and so far working in 26 countries, still adding to both lists. Um, I obviously realized at some stage, pretty early in my career, that something is not working here for me. And then I realized that, yeah, it's we have cultural differences. I have not much of an idea how to bridge them. So hence my idea to actually study the topic. So what we can do is, obviously we have to train ourselves in intercultural competence.
How would you suggest maybe going about that as a first couple of steps for individuals, for people, say, in our analog astronaut community?
You can book my trainings. I have developed specific trainings, intercultural competence for space professionals.
Oh, fascinating. Okay,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
and it actually took me about 1.5 years
Yeah.
to do that. I had the normal intercultural training,
Mhm.
but then if you speak to space professionals, they, yeah, as I said, they have their own language. If you
Mm.
don't know how that a rocket needs escape velocity, not escape height, they don't take you serious. They, yeah, you can't build trust with them
Yeah.
if you don't speak a bit space language. I mean, you
Yes.
don't have to do calculations in orbital mechanics, but it's very very peculiar. So I have familiarized myself with the most common cultural pitfalls and cultural opportunities of space flight. I have in the process I read every single autobiography of not only astronauts, but also mission control people, you know, like Chris Kraft, Gene Kranz, and like, and just looked out for anything cultural, and there were many things cultural. And I've read hundreds of mission reports. I also spoke to more than 20 astronauts personally, and everybody says, oh gosh, we need more training there. It's an issue, and yes, we have had issues also on the space station, and so based on all this, I have built a specific training for the space industry.
Yeah, that's really, so I wasn't aware of that. So thank you for sharing that with us, so that now we know that that's definitely something that's people in the community might want to consider.
Yeah, we might just we
Yeah.
can offer it at a reduced rate for the community.
Oh, okay, right. I might post something in the community then for people if they are interested. And
Yeah.
I think also, as just from a personal experience, you know, the very fundamentals is something that you spoke about as well, is you have to start with basically, you know, learning, right? You have to be open to learn, you have to listen, and you have to observe.
Yeah.
And that's really the fundamental of starting with any culture, whether it's a professional culture or it's like a difference in like nationality cultures or country cultures. And you know, and again, growing up, so they call, I guess, people such as myself and others who grow up in two different cultures, like third culture kids, because you know, so for me, it was a British culture plus like Punjabi Indian culture. And it takes time, like you were saying as well, to fully understand the differences between them. And you spend your sort of childhood learning this, and then by the time you become an adult, you've developed this, almost like they say, the third culture, where you have combined a combination of the two, but you understand both. So it's not a quick process, it is a slow process.
It is a very slow process, and the most difficult thing about learning about intercultural cooperation is actually to understand one's own culture, because to us it's so logical that we don't reflect on it. Yeah, just one example. If I go to a restaurant and I order some food, I don't tell the waiter that, oh, please serve it on a plate and bring me a knife and a fork and a napkin, because it's so embedded in us that we don't think about these things. We do think about these things when we, for example, go for the first time to China. And instead of a plate, we get a bowl. And instead of a knife and fork, we get chopsticks. And we're surprised. Oh, yeah. Now, at home, we use plates and cutlery. But it's the learning to identify our own cultural software, or yeah, as we might call it, our own cultural building blocks. That's quite different. And when it comes to living in other cultures, I think we're more splitting our culture into two layers. We are not losing our local culture, and we usually have much more local or regional culture than national culture, especially when we're in big countries, but also some small countries. Think about how many official languages Switzerland has, yeah. But we have also developed a kind of global culture at work when we're communicating with each others across borders, across the world, especially now that almost everyone knows how to use Zoom. So we're not losing our local or regional or national culture by building an international culture. It's kind of, we learn how to switch between them. Yeah, so it's actually enriching our lives. It's
like layers upon layers.
Yes, yeah. I still remember my first English lesson at school when I was 10 years old. I was just so shocked. It's just, my God, I have a second world now. It was just so eye-opening for me. Hey, new language is just like another world it was for me. So
that's really interesting that you say that. Is language is absolutely key to understanding culture. It's like, you speak again, if people are interested in learning about other cultures, then one of the first steps is try learning the language. That's an excellent way to sort of open the door to a new culture.
Yeah, because also a lot of culture is embedded in language.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of it is lost in translation. The sense of humor can be lost in translation,
Yes.
Yeah. Very easily, I think. In fact, and that's another thing, humor that can be another one where it can be misunderstood or it can be misconstrued, and the differences again between different culture humor is fascinating to me. It's
what is funny, what can we joke about? What is allowed are we joking? Are we allowed to joke about our government? Is our government allowed to joke about us? So, and that very much depends on culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think the culture on Mars and the Moon will be like?
That's very interesting. And I'm afraid we don't have anywhere near even touch the surface of that topic, because we don't know what language we will be speaking there. It's kind of everybody assuming that we will speak English. I don't think English is a very good language for that purpose, because English language has so many words with double or triple or quadruple meanings that it's actually really inviting for misunderstandings. Yeah. So also the pronunciation is not anywhere near as what is, the spelling. Yeah, so I think we should start thinking about using a more suitable language. I mean, I don't know all the languages in the world, but from the languages I speak, I would say Spanish would be my favorite, because that's pretty clear. It has a very structured grammar. Everything is exactly pronounced as it's written. There are not so many double meanings, but there might be far more suitable languages, African languages, Asian languages. So we just kind of, yeah, we assume that it will be English. What will we eat? Yeah, we have to make some choices, also cultural choices. Food is very cultural, but we can't take, if we have 100 people with the first, if we're sending 100 people with the first rocket, now we can't cater for the taste of 100 different people. So we need to kind of make some choices, but we should not make the choices too narrow, because if people don't get their favorite food for a longer time, they will not feel so well anymore. And we come again to psychological aspects, because culture and psychology are really very much interlinked. They will get upset. And yeah, what values will we have on the moon, on Mars? Yeah, what will be our laws? We haven't even defined a legal system. Never mind laws. We don't know, will we have common law or civil law or Sharia law? Nobody has really said anything. We don't know how we can. Yeah, I don't want to even use the word colonize, because we shouldn't colonize Mars. We should settle it, explore it, or whatever, because we've seen how it works with colonizing. It was not very successful in the end. We don't know what communication style we will use. Will we use direct communication style or indirect communication style? Will we use the metric system? I hope so. Or the imperial system? All of this has not really been discussed. Yeah, how will we, things like how will we bury our dead? Yeah, it's which holidays will we have on Mars? Will we have everybody's holiday from the entire team, meaning we will not work at all, because and somebody has a holiday every day? Or will we have specific holidays on Mars, like the first rover on Mars will be a holiday. The first Mars landing day will be a national holiday, or planetary holiday. We don't even have a name for that. Yes, you see, and there's still so many things to consider. Will we have pets on Mars? Dogs or cats or spiders or whatever? It's so many open questions, and I'm very skeptical if people say, okay, we'll go in 10 years, we'll land people on Mars. I'm absolutely convinced that we have the rockets ready, the technology ready to do that, and I'm absolutely convinced that we will not have the people ready.
In terms of their training?
Well, we can't really start training when we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. So what are we training for?
We don't know which language we will speak, when we don't know which system of measurements we will be using. There is nothing to train yet. There are some things, of course, but we can always do intercultural training and conflict management training, but also that has some cultural aspects. But it's really interesting how people are so focused on getting the technology ready, and nobody takes care about getting the people ready.
Yes, and I think this is going to become especially important when it comes to the commercial crews, even more so. And you know, just thinking about it, I guess, like you're saying, what language will we speak, what food will we eat, and all these important considerations is probably going to depend a lot on how multicultural the crews are that land. And are we going to end up with little pockets of one culture here and another culture over there? Or is there going to be, due to better and bigger collaborations, just one Martian culture in the end, or one moon culture?
Yeah, the basic question, and that goes takes us back to basic anthropology. Will we allow a culture to form on Mars independently, or will we design a culture for Mars and we'll just implement it? Yeah, if we let culture develop, we have made some experiments. Yeah, we have invaded the American continent some hundreds of years ago, and we have seen what happens to the cultures. Yeah, that they don't really mix. Yeah, they people, they are in their subcultures. Yeah, they have a very different subculture in New York than they have in Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's very different in Waukesha. Yeah. So not even that has been given anywhere near enough thought. How do we want the culture to be? Do we just wait and see what happens? Or do we just design a culture and say, okay, this is our culture that we are going to start with? And I can guarantee that this will not be the culture we will have there 10 years on. Yeah, because culture, as I said, it's not a static concept. It's constantly evolving.
Can
Of
I
course,
make a
Karin, yeah.
comment? It's Shannon. I don't think using the United States invasion of the United States and the resulting mix of people here is a particularly good example of culture at all. I understand, I think, where you were coming from, but I think it's a huge misrepresentation to take what you see in the media. I don't know if you've lived in the United States as what actually is happening here. And
I have been
from my perspective,
to the United States many times, to many different areas, and it was just one example. We can take India as an example. It's basically very similar. We can take Africa as an example. It's quite similar.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not at all. And culture is so much more than the ethnic or cultural identity. And I mean, I've lived here for 6 decades now, and I've lived where I've been the minority in this country twice, and I think it's a really unfair example.
Unfair in which...
I mean, I would rather take subcultures. To say that somehow
cultures.
No, I don't think ethnicity in America is a correct example of subculture.
Yeah, I wasn't even
think
talking
that
about
Americans.
I wasn't mentioning the word ethnicity. I don't know where that comes from now.
So I think maybe the example is like, you know, Karin said, say New York versus Chicago. So I think we might be saying like, so the New York influence, and I'm not an expert in this at all, but might be influenced from like Italian immigrants versus maybe different immigrants that settled in Chicago. So it's not so much about ethnicity, but perhaps just like a different cultural groups that settled in different parts of the US.
Yeah, and it's different if you live on the coast in a different climate. It's different when you live in the Great Lakes.
I agree with you, but I think that your suggestion that Chicago, New York, all major cities in the U.S. They have their own culture, but they also have. I mean, for example, I think that New York and Melbourne, Australia, are more alike than New York and any other, and LA, for example. So, you know, I'm just saying that I think that it maybe, as someone who's not American, using America as an example, if you haven't actually lived here, is not a good idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I offended you in any way. I don't understand how, because I was just saying,
no, you didn't offend
we
me.
know that when we start living somewhere else, our culture will diversify. And if, what I was saying is, if we design a culture for Mars, then
this maybe goes back to another thing that you said, and you said that you felt that the most important way to understanding about being in mixed cultures, unless I misunderstood you, was to understand your own culture. I think the most important way to interact in a mixed culture is to understand other people's culture, where other people come from.
yeah,
I don't necessarily think that language, I mean, I spent 10 years living on the Navajo Nation, and my understanding of the Navajo language, which, as you may not know, or you do know, is extremely complex, is very, very minimal. But I think that having lived there for a decade, and I definitely, without learning more than I probably know, 10 Navajo words that I use consistently. Unfortunately, one of them is drunk person, but it's the idea is that I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, because I'm a scientist. I'm not, I don't understand, I've never been trained on any of this, but I think it's this kind of more mixing it up with other people and understanding where they come from is a little bit, and being open to that is a little bit more important than trying to learn their language.
yeah.
Does that make sense? Or am I?
I'm lost in thought now, because my example was, what I was saying was that when we design a culture for Mars and we send the first 100 people there to live, in 10 years, the culture will have changed. Yeah. Like, we don't have the same culture today anymore in New York or in Chicago. I didn't want to offend anybody, and I don't know that what can be negative.
No, you did not offend me at all. I'm saying that I don't, from my perspective, it was not a good illustration of what you were trying to say. And that was not the way I would have used it, as like, I think of subcultures more as, sanitation workers have a different subculture than doctors.
Okay,
right?
Yeah, that's not my way of thinking, but I'm sure they will. So would you be more comfortable
I mean, I see more.
If I said that people...
No, I'm not uncomfortable. I'm speaking as an academic. I think that sanitation workers in their cultural aspects are going to have, in the same way that you said that scientists, different disciplines in science are going to have different subculture. I think that sanitation workers are going to have a different subculture than doctors.
We'll have a different...
So I don't think it has to be... Yeah, so it doesn't have to be based on place. It has to be based on where you, because on Mars, we're all going to live in the same place, right? We're all going to come together in the same place. But we're all going to come from different perspectives based on where our place that we came from is.
Yeah.
Whether that's a professional place, a cultural place, a ethnic place, a national place. That makes sense?
Yeah, I still don't know where we go, where we're not in.
So I think this is a really, really interesting discussion, and I'm glad that we're talking about this, actually, because this is exactly what we were saying. Like, we need to have these conversations. I am just mindful that the time is now coming to sort of a close. So I just want to open it up back to Karin and just ask you if you have any sort of last words that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I can only ask everyone to participate in the discussion of how we're going to live, how we would like to live on Mars. What can be our culture? Do we want to design it, or do we just want to let it happen? how do we imagine, apart from making sure that we have enough food to eat and enough oxygen to breathe, how do we want to spend our lives there?
Excellent. So thank you very much. Thank you, Karin, for discussing this with us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Shannon, as well, for the questions and the interesting discussion, and for the rest of our audience. So I will record this, and I'll put the recording up in the Analog Astronaut community for people to watch after the event as well. And I'm sure you can reach out to Karin either through the community, or Karin, if you have any other links or contact information you'd like to share, please feel free to do so as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, anybody can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only one with my name, so it's pretty easy to connect with me.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thanks very much.